Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
Hey, it's William, and welcome to today's episode of the Catalytic Leadership Podcast. Each week, we tackle a topic related to the field of leadership. My goal is to ensure that you have actionable steps you can take from each episode to grow in your own leadership. Growth doesn't just happen. My goal is to help you become intentional about it. Each week, we spotlight leaders from a variety of fields, organizations, and locations. And my goal is for you to see that leaders can be catalytic no matter where they are or what they lead. I draw inspiration from the stories and journeys of these leaders, and I hear from many of you that you do too. Let's jump into today's interview. I am thrilled today to have Roy Furr on the podcast. Roy discovered direct response marketing in 2005 between calls at a miserable customer service call center. Within months, he became the top marketing guy at an IT training publisher, putting them on the Inc. magazine list of America's fastest growing businesses 3 times. By 2010, he pivoted into his own business full-time, consulting, copywriting, and now providing fractional CMO and Copy Chief services for direct marketing entrepreneurs, especially in wealth-related niches. He quickly became known for creating 7-figure plus campaigns and breaking sales records. He's made millions for his clients, and his client list is a who's who of his niches. Roy publishes his daily Breakthrough Marketing Secrets newsletter and podcast. He has trained, coached, and mentored other copywriters, marketers, and entrepreneurs to their own success. And he's the author of 2 books, The Copywriter's Guide to Getting Paid and The Ultimate Selling Story. Roy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation, William. Like when we connected, it just felt like, I don't know, we have a good energy, and I think we're going to share a lot of value with your folks today.
That's always my goal. I'd love to start, Roy, by you sharing some of your story with our listeners, particularly around your journey, your development as a leader. How did you get started?
So, some people have, some people are born great. Some people discover greatness. Some people have greatness thrust upon them, and some people just kind of stumble into it, if or we'll apply it to leadership, right? So, for quite a while in my life, I was directionless and just followed what was interesting to me. And maybe part of that is because of my ADHD, which actually went undiagnosed for a long time, but it was just like, if it's interesting to me, I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to have just a ball of energy around that. And if it's not interesting to me, I'm going to struggle a lot. Right.
Yeah.
So I graduated from college in 2004 with an undergrad degree in psychology, and with an undergrad degree in psychology and no plans to go to grad school, pretty much the best job that you can get is answering calls at the local gas company's customer service call center. So that was my first full-time job. I had a little sales experience and stuff, but that was my first full-time job. And it was miserable because, William, I know you're a financial deadbeat and all, so you understand. No. But if somebody didn't pay their gas bill all winter,
right.
There was the first warm day of spring, the gas company could send somebody out, shut off the service. And then that person is calling to yell at somebody at the gas company. Well, hi, I'm Roy. So I got to be yelled at quite a bit. And I also, being brand new, they kind of stuck in whatever shift they had available. So my full-time job was from noon to 9 p.m. Good news about that was nobody wanted to talk to the gas company after dinner. So there was a lot of time between calls, and I knew I wasn't going to go into psychology. I knew that I had some writing skill, and I found this book called The Well-Fed Writer that said, there are these people who are writers who actually write for businesses, and they can make a good living. And they're called copywriters. And like something clicked. right? Like that interest thing.
Yeah.
ADHD, one of the ways it's been described is that it's while regular people have an importance-based, or while neurotypical people have an importance-based nervous system, people with ADHD have an interest-based nervous system. So if you're interested in something, it's going to activate you regardless of its importance, right?
Wow.
So I got activated by this copywriting thing, and part of what was mentioned in that book was there's some people who do direct response marketing, and it's like you get paid based on the performance of your work. And like, for me, that was, it's both a challenge and just like this thrill of being paid for performance, being very entrepreneurial, working with entrepreneurial companies, doing that. Yeah. Well, within 6 months, I had become that marketing guy for the IT training company. And as the company was growing, we hired more marketers, and I became a part of, we joked around that it was the brain trust of the company, like a few people, people in sales, people in management, people in tech, right? I became a member of the brain trust because I just kind of stumbled into it, and I was interested enough that I just, I was led up by how can we sell more training, right? How can we help more people improve their IT careers? And, leadership opportunity after leadership opportunity early on was more like that. So shortly after I went freelance, I worked with a financial publisher, and they needed this copy chief role. So I had a couple successful promotions with them, and, I participate in the peer reviews where we review each other's copy. And I just kind of leveled up into this role where instead of just being one of the copywriters on the team, I was suddenly in charge of the copywriters on the team. And eventually, I started more intentionally creating those opportunities. So I had a client that needed a bunch of copy written, and I ended up hiring a copywriting team and building a copywriting team and training those copywriters. And more recently, I've again been more intentional about it, go from stumbling to having my feet underneath me a little bit. And I've been proactively working with companies as that fractional CMO and copy chief role, taking more of the leadership role, as, just because that seems to be where I have provided a ton of value to clients. And so why not lean into it, right?
Some people listening may not be familiar with that role, the fractional CMO. I mean, that's a relatively new, right, invention, so to speak. Can you describe a little bit about what your role looks like in that?
Okay. So the CMO of a company typically is the highest level marketing role, and they typically report to the CEO, the board, the ownership, whatever, right? So the CMO is the chief marketing officer, and they're in charge of the marketing department, everything from HR to making sure that the creative that's going out is good, to the technology is being supported, to traffic strategies and convergent, getting customers. If you have a sales team, working with the sales team to make sure that they have marketing generated leads who are ready to convert, all that good stuff, right? So the CMO role is fairly familiar. The difference between a CMO and a fractional CMO is just that I work with multiple clients at a time in that leadership role, up to 10 hours a week. That's the higher level of engagement. The lower level of engagement is almost like a coach or consultant. And so there's a couple different options based on what companies need. The big value is you get that level of marketing leadership without a full investment into what a full-time CMO would cost, on the job market today. And that means that there's kind of a sweet spot. While companies over 50 million or so, and a lot of that's just a really broad brushstroke, right? But companies over about 50 million, it does really make sense to hire a full-time CMO. But companies maybe in the $5 to $50 million range are going to benefit a lot from somebody who's able to provide that level of leadership, but who is not going to be full-time as part of what you do.
I love that.
And so,
I love that model.
Yeah. It works really well. The fractional, that fractional executive role, I think that it started in fractional, what is it? CFOs, chief financial officers, somebody that could just help you with those big, important financial decisions. And other executive groupings have been picking it up as well. Well, for me, I like it because, so many times there's the ability to go deep and really engage with the team and make sure that the team is performing at its best is really richly rewarding. And when I was working more as a freelancer and consultant, it's always like you're on the outside looking in. And so you're providing value, but at the same time, it's just kind of going into this black box of the marketing department and you don't know what's going to happen. And, I work with good clients, so usually it works out well, but there's always this like, again, you're on the outside looking in. There's this layer of glass that's either, fairly clear or fairly tinted between you and what's going on in the business.
That's really good. You have a lot of insight and experience dealing with so many different leaders in the space, so many different companies, organizations. Is there something that stands out to you as the biggest missing ingredient in most of these marketing departments?
So what ends up happening, and one of the reasons that I end up with people is oftentimes there's a very strong marketing leader at like an executive. Oftentimes the companies that I work with are started by somebody who's a really good marketer.
Yeah.
And then the company grows through, well, lots of means, but the marketing department grows with marketing technician type roles. So there's this person at this technical level, there's this person at this technical, and the skills that they could be a specialist in, they could be media buyers, they could be copywriters, they could be web designers or web tech people. But what happens is there ends up being a gap between this technician tier and this executive who used to be able to run the whole company pretty easily. And then they reach a point where the company has grown, where they still need to be focusing on the vision of the company, what to do next, all of that. And they don't need to be translating that vision into actionable steps for their marketing department and strategies and all of that. So where I end up playing the biggest role is kind of taking the weight off the shoulders of the CEO, the owner, the founder, who could do the strategy and leadership themselves,
right,
but has reached a point where the business can't grow if they're having to do that for every segment of the business. And so if we're talking about missing ingredients, it's often more of a problem of growth than anything else. It's like, I don't know. It's like all those little ties that hold things together are under strain as growth occurs, right?
I love that picture. And I think that's something that I've encountered with my coaching clients as well, that they roadblock their own growth.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's only so many hours in a day. And you can work harder, you can work longer, you can hustle, you can grind, you can do all those things to a point, but it becomes counterproductive at a certain point.
So I had this fun idea that I turned into an article on my site called Time to Hire a CMO. And I happen to be interested in ancient Rome. And one of the things that would happen, like Rome was very big for trading and there were ships and all of that. And I'm trying to remember the name of the title. I might be able to pull it up real quick. If you were a Roman merchant, right? And this could apply today, right? You're a Roman merchant. You may start off saying, I'm going to buy a ship and I'm going to go start trading. I'm going to take my ship and I'm going to go to North Africa. I'm going to get some grain. I'm going to bring it back to Rome. I'm going to sell the grain, and then we're going to keep going. And you might start off with, this ship and a fairly sparse crew. And then you may realize that it would be better to have, another couple crew members for the next journey and so on. Like it's you grow and grow, right? And then you say, okay, well, I'm kind of at my limit here. of one ship versus having two ships. So I'm going to buy a second ship, right? And then we're going to go on this journey together. And maybe you end up with 2 or 3 ships. And what you start to have is captains for the different ships in your fleet. And then at some point, ideally, you become this role, the Magister Navis, the master of the vessel, who really your role is to set the destinations and the trading routes. And you may or may not go on each of those journeys. Instead, you own the fleet, right? And you have trusted roles within the fleet. And your fleet, insert your business here, can only be as successful as the leadership that you put on the different crews. And so thinking about it in that way, if you think about it like, oh, a fleet of ships and whatever, and your different departments are that, if you insist on having to captain every ship, you're gonna constrain your business's ability to grow.
Yes. You can only be in one place at a time.
Absolutely. Yes.
Your mind can only be in one place really at a time.
Yeah. And there's lots of research on that the more we try to multitask, there are some people who are naturally better at it than others, but multitasking is really a misnomer.
Yes.
All that you're doing is quick switching. You're switching between, okay, this. And for me, like, I have to work extra hard to manage that because of the ADHD. Yeah. I opened up Facebook to reply to a post that I knew was there, but I wasn't at my computer to reply. And then suddenly I'm like 3 clicks deep and I'm like, hold on, wait a second. All that I wanted to do was send that one guy a message.
Yep.
Yes. And multiply that by the 1,000 things that come up in your business. And you really benefit from having trusted people in your business who can help you manage some of that. And so you can just focus on your direct reports.
I think what you've just described illustrates for so many people who are listening the importance of continually and consistently developing your leadership bench. Right.
Yes.
Most often people are not going to arrive into your team, your company, your organization. They're not going to arrive fully developed and ready to roll according to your DNA and SOPs. You got to develop that. And if you develop it internally, if you have a bench that is consistently growing and being poured into, invested in, developed, then you're going to be able to develop those captains, right, who are going to take control of each one of those ships. But they're going to be developed according to your DNA for your company.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're constantly developing them, that becomes your culture, regardless of any like things that you're going to try to do to do culture building or team building activities, right?
Sure.
Team building and culture building is a day-to-day thing. And yes, the more consistently that you're working with those people to both learn your system and to let their own strengths shine, their own autonomy shine, because that's a huge part of what makes for successful leadership is you have to let somebody play to their strengths, and you have to like it's your job to set the vision, right?
Yeah.
And this happens at different levels of leadership as well. So like owner / CEO sets the C-level or the company-wide vision. And then CMO, as an example, says, okay, in order to meet this company vision, what's the marketing stuff that has to happen? And then here are the objectives for the marketing department. And then the individual people within the marketing department, for example, somebody who's in charge of driving traffic through Facebook ads, Google ads, they say, okay, if the objective is X number of booked calls per month, I have the autonomy to figure out, to solve that problem.
Yes.
And figure out how we can do that best. And both constraints and flexibility, right? So you have 10% of our budget dedicated to testing whatever the heck you want to try and achieve our objectives. And here's our total budget. Well, if you figure out something there, we can roll that up into the rest of the budget. And it moves out of that testing phase, right? But it's about that mix between having a vision or objectives that you want to reach, and giving people the flexibility to try and creatively problem solve, because that's your team is going to flourish most. Teams flourish most. I've seen it. You've probably seen it too.
Yep.
Teams flourish most when they can rally behind something and they have some constraints for how to achieve it, but they have a lot of flexibility to figure out the how to.
I think that's one of the greatest ingredients for success, particularly going forward from this point. I think that's one of the big takeaways from this most recent COVID season, right? We saw the power and the draw of agility, flexibility, the ability to pivot quickly and make decisions on the fly, not just haphazardly, but with teams that were designed in such a way that they had those constraints, right? They're not just, we're going to spend $10 million of our $11 million budget on this one project that we hope might work. Okay, that's a terrible idea, right? You have constraints, but you have the flexibility to say, hey, we want you to take some flyers. We want you to shoot off a blue sky idea every once in a while with constraints.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's going to help you innovate.
I don't know if Google still does this, but they had that rule where something like 10% of your week or whatever was supposed to be dedicated to whatever you wanted. And that turns into products in the business, because if you have your team already in there doing the work and thinking about solving the big problems, and you have hopefully creative people, smart people, capable people on your team, what's going to happen is those people, some of their problem solving may be related to something completely outside of your business scope, but some of it may be that next big innovation that your company needs.
Exactly. I use Gmail, right, for Google Apps, right, for the back end of my business, right? So Gmail was one of those 10% projects. It started as somebody's just blue sky 10% project that they tried. And now this is a major component of Google's business model, right?
Yes.
Google Workplace, Google Apps. I mean, this is a big deal, but where did it start? With an idea somebody had. Hey, let's see if I can make something.
What if we can make email a little bit easier?
Right, exactly. Could that help anybody?
Yeah.
On a previous call, you and I talked about a 4P process that you teach. And I love this when you share this with me. I would love for you to share this with our listeners, because I think there's so much value here in what you're bringing.
Yes. So let me give just a tiny bit of context here. Most of the value. Most of the directly measurable value that I provide to a client is going to be something like marketing strategy. Like I'm going to tell you how to structure your marketing campaign or your sales funnel or whatever in order to achieve the goals that you want to achieve, right? But like all of those ideas, you're probably familiar with this. A consultant comes in, they give the best of ideas, and it just sits on a hard drive somewhere or whatever. Like, it's a great idea. It never gets implemented. So the whole other side of that, and part of the difference between being a consultant and a CMO, embedded marketing leadership, is this whole like, instead of just saying, here's what you need to do, this 4P process is designed to first identify what you need to do, but then actually make sure that it gets done. And so while this comes out of my work as a CMO focused on marketing, this process is actually pretty universal. You can apply it to your individual, your individual projects, your individual planning, or you could apply it in your IT department. You could apply it in your whatever department has some level of projects that need to get done. Right. So I'm going to actually, before we get into 4Ps, I'm going to do step 0, which is whenever I talk to a client or potential client, prospect, a new connection, whatever, I do an intro call just to figure out if we're a fit, because good thing about leadership, like you figure out if you're a fit first. If you're not a fit, okay. So let's assume that I'm a fit with somebody. The first thing that I do is and this comes from like, This also comes from my marketing background of identifying problems, because most good products, most good offers solve some kind of problem for someone, right?
Yes.
And sometimes the problem is something that we would identify as a problem. I use leaky roofs as an example all the time, right? And so if somebody has a leaky roof, they're going out to solve that leaky roof, right? They're looking for a solution. But also a problem could be an unfulfilled opportunity, an unfulfilled desire, right? It could be something that somebody wants but they don't have yet, right? So the first P is problem. And so in the context of marketing, it's like, oh, our sales team doesn't have enough leads, our website doesn't have enough conversions, our website doesn't have enough traffic, actually traffic, conversions, or even though we're getting good traffic and conversions, it's not profitable right now. So economics, traffic, conversions, economics is like 99% of marketing problems, right? The first P and the first step of my process is just to find out all of the biggest problems, challenges, desires, unfulfilled opportunities, upcoming campaigns that are not created yet, big goals, existing priorities, all those things in your business. And problems is just a catch-all, right? Yeah. And so we want to figure out the problems. And if you're doing this for yourself, you could pull out a journal, pull out a piece of paper if the word journal makes you uncomfortable, and just think like, what are all the things that are not exactly how I want them to be? Right? You start that process. What are all the things that are not exactly how I want them to be? What would I like to have happen? What roadblocks am I running into? What challenge? Like lots of words, lots of questions that we can use to get to that same thing, but we're just trying to come up with a big problem list. Now, what you'll start to notice, and if you're doing this for yourself, you could set a timer for 60 minutes or something where you're just doing that focused thinking. The goal in the beginning is not to try and filter, prioritize, to structure, to group, to say anything is worse or better. Like it's brainstorming, and brainstorming at its best. The whole storming part is that everything comes out and you can figure out what's important later, right?
Good.
So that's step number one. P is problems. Number two is priority. And this is where you start to sort it. So we spent 60 minutes on a call, in a conversation, in a meeting, or on a piece of paper, identifying all the problems that we would like to have solved for our business to run better, or for whatever objective we're trying to reach to happen. Well, what you're going to start to notice if you look at that list is, number one, a lot of the problems could be grouped together. And so it could be, if you fix the conversion rate on your website, the quantity of leads you're getting for your sales team is going to be solved. So you might recognize that, like, 3 of the problems, 5 of the problems are linked to each other. You're also going to notice that some of them are much more important. So for example, updating our company description on LinkedIn may not be the biggest marketing problem, right? Versus making sure that your sales team has those leads that are going to turn into sales and revenue for your company going forward. So step 2, the second P is priority. So we have problems, and then we set priority. And I intentionally used the singular version of this word because we laughed about this in our last conversation. Priorities until the 20th century was not a word. It was not used plural. It comes from the Latin a priori, which is that thing that comes before everything else, right? So priority was a singular word. And because I'm thinking is part of this process on a 12-week cycle, I'm not necessarily thinking that there can only be one thing we're going to focus on, but I still like to think about that as a thought tool to, hey, if we could only solve one of these problems, or 2 or 3, right? Which ones are going to be the most important? Which one? What's the biggest, most important problem to solve first? And then what? And then what after that, right? And so what you need to do, you identify the problems, then you set a priority. And really, for this process, you're looking for the top maybe 3 problems to solve. And then, and this is happening in marketing, this is happening at a strategic level with a CEO, with the owner, like what needs to happen for the business to be more successful going forward. And so step 3 is plan. So we have our problems list. We have identified, let's say, priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, right? So the first problem, the second problem, and the third problem we want to solve. Each of those really does represent a project, right? Or if you say, what do I believe is most likely to solve that problem? So it is not that get more leads for the sales team is a project. It is, we can come up with a project based on everything that we have, all the assets that we have in place, all the resources, all of that. We can come up with a project that should help get more leads, that should help solve that problem, right? So we come up with a plan for what to do, right? What the projects are that are most likely going to help us solve those problems. And so we've gone through problem, we've gone through priority, we've gone through plan at this point. And that plan should be, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Dan Sullivan impact filter process. I have a filled out one here. One of the most important questions on there is the success criteria. So what has to be true when this project is finished? And so you come up with the big outcome that you're looking for this project, and then you come up with all the things that have to be true. And this is actually a place, going back to the autonomy of the members of your team, if you define what has to be true and then let them come up with their best way to figure out how to make that true, that can be really a huge opportunity for your team to shine and to bring their own unique strengths to the game. And of course, as a leader, you're going to help them throughout the process if they need help with any aspect of that. And you may need to sign off on some things that they need to do, right? But really what we're looking at is, what do we want to be true? What does the completed project look like? It looks like X number of leads per month, up from where we're at right now. And what has to be true is, identifying, perhaps we recognize that the lead conversion system is not as effective as we want it to be, that we need to be sending in more traffic. And there's going to be some items, right? But the whole point is we have a big project with the things that are going to be true for that project to be done. And that's our plan. And then we get to the fourth P. And the other thing that I guess that I didn't mention as part of the plan is that I popped this all into a process that is inspired by the 12-week year, which is, it essentially lays out, okay, over the course of 12, here's the 12 weeks across the top of the spreadsheet. And on the left-hand side, here are all the things that we're trying to accomplish in the 12 weeks. And then I create check boxes for both progress and completion, right? So something may take 3 weeks and it may be week 4, 5, and 6 that needs to be completed during. So week 4, there should be progress. Week 5, there should be progress. And week 6, we should be able to mark it off as done, right? And so that's giving us a visual plan of what needs to be accomplished over the next 90 days, 12 weeks, right? And then it comes to performance. And I know for me, so I'm going to start by criticizing myself, so I don't have to criticize people that, are reporting to me. I'm going to start by criticizing myself. I'm given that 12-week plan and I have all the ambition to complete it. And some of those things are going to get done early. Some of those things are going to get done late, right? Some of those things I'm going to struggle to get done and run into roadblocks. And so step 4, performance, is where the actual, I guess it's all leadership, but it's where the management comes in, right? And so what you're doing is, at a very minimum on a weekly basis, but ideally on a daily basis, you are doing essentially a quick stand-up meeting, if it's daily. And you're saying, okay, here's our priorities for the week. What's going on? What are you working on? Are there any roadblocks? What do we do next, right? And on a weekly basis, you're making sure you update your plan. If necessary, you're going to take some things off because they were done early, or you're going to extend the deadline on some things. But you're also going to recognize, because this does kind of work into a waterfall type system, right? With some of these projects, you're going to recognize, okay, if we're bumping the due date on this part of the project, there are some consequences that we're going to have to move everything out. But when it's done on this 12-week basis, and a lot of times I like to give myself some flexibility around weeks 11, 12, 13. Week 13 is automatically a flex week in the 12-week year system. At the end of the 12 weeks, I like to try and the plan says we're going to be done a little bit early. So we have a little bit of flexibility there.
Yeah.
unless there's, of course, like an event or something that we're all rushing towards.
Sure.
But yeah, then it's just managing the performance throughout that 12 weeks. And then what happens when we get to the end of the 12 weeks? We repeat. We go back to the problems list. We make sure it's complete. We check in. Are there, new problems that have come up? Can we mark off some of these problems because the projects were successful? Whatever. Then we do the priority step next, and then we do a plan for the next 12 weeks, and then we manage performance for throughout the 12 weeks. And it can be repeated ad infinitum, right? Yeah. And when you're focused on solving bigger problems, solving the biggest problems in the business, that is, it's not always going to work, right? One of the things that you learn about marketing, the more experience you get, the less confident you're going to be that any individual thing is going to work. Mm-hmm. You may love it. You may think it's brilliant, but it may completely flop, right? Yeah. But this process of saying, well, what's the problem we need to solve? Oh, what are we going to do to try to solve it? Over time, you're going to get some wins. You're going to be able to repeat what works. You're going to be able to stop doing what doesn't work. And you're going to solve a lot of those problems, and you're going to grow the business.
That is so incredibly practical. And I'm so grateful to you for sharing this with me and with our listeners. When you first shared that with me, I was jotting down notes like crazy. And I've added some today, just listening to you talk about it again, because it is so practical, no matter what field you're in. Yeah. This is adaptable and flexible to fit any business, any organization. Yeah.
I mean, you could let's just take something completely different. If your business has an entire HR department, right? What are our current business problems as they relate to our staffing situation, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're going to identify what the biggest problems are, and then we are going to establish a priority. What does the HR department need to focus on next, mm-hmm. right? And then we're going to create a plan for what they're going to do over the next 12 weeks to address those biggest problems in the order of priority, right? And then we're going to follow the plan for performance, right? And ideally achieve that goal.
That's so good. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And that's what you do. You help walk leaders through this for their department, their team, their organization, their company, whatever. You help walk them through this and guide and coach them and provide the accountability that we know is the secret sauce of coaching success.
Yes. So early on, I can pretend like I'm a marketing genius, and I can come up with lots of good ideas for different sales systems and all of that. And, like I just worked with a client recently, and I just recognized that their sales process, while it was fairly good and fairly effective, wasn't really scalable, and it probably wasn't getting them near the results that they wanted to get. And sales process actually included, dipping my fingers in the sales team structure as well, and the sales, the process that the people who actually got on the phone with potential clients, that they followed as well. And then it was all the marketing stuff that fed into that. But I can pretend like I'm a genius and do all that, but unless, and the other thing that can happen is sometimes I just do a half day, like VIP day. Mm-hmm. And I hand this stuff off to them, and they have operations people that are capable of implementing, right? Yeah. Or, hey, I'm in there. If you need this role within your company, mm-hmm. that's also what I'm able to do.
So from a broad perspective, like as you're looking across the marketing landscape these days, what are, in your opinion, some of the biggest challenges that we're going to see in marketing in the next decade?
So one of the major things is there's all sorts of tumultuousness around AI. And I do think that the individual roles within marketing are probably going to change as much in the next decade as they have in the last 1,000 years, right? I'm not saying jobs are going to go away. I'm just saying that things are changing very fast with the technology that's available. And I think that we've kind of reached that point where on one side of it, it's like, hey, look what the funny monkey can do. And on the other side, you have Albert Einstein coming up with E equals MC squared. And on the exponential growth curve of it's just ridiculous, right? And so I think one of the big challenges is figuring out with the new capabilities what we're going to, I guess how the roles are going to shift and change. One of the things that happens all the time, and that will certainly happen with this, is that whole shiny object syndrome. And I'm seeing it with AI right now.
Yeah.
It is very hard to get AI to write something that's actually good if you look at it on a deeper level.
Yeah.
If you look at it on a superficial level, you're like, hey, that's great. It's awesome, right? And so there is the shiny object syndrome of, oh, cool, ChatGPT can now write for me. So I'm just gonna stop hiring marketing writers because ChatGPT can write it. And in some cases, like blog articles that you could hire out to a content farm, maybe that's actually a fine thing to do. But for your core conversion pieces, the stuff that's actually connecting with your potential clients, your potential customers, and getting them to move forward through the buying process, it's not there. So I think that there's going to be lots of challenges just around technology and what it can and can't do, and just how it's impacting us as marketers. Really quickly, my long-term, like what I believe is actually going to happen is you're going to be able to have some kind of conversation with AI, just like you would have conversation with a marketing consultant and say, this is what my offer is. This is what it does. Here's all the benefits that I think it is. Here's who it's for. And it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. And then based on the kind of data that, Facebook has gotten in trouble for, and, like that big data stuff that's available about our behavior online and our interests and all of that, the AI on a person by person basis, William shows up at my website, it's going to actually be able to write and maybe even create a video that looks like me talking to you about my product, but it's very customized to your interests. And also it does a really good job of speaking about my offer in a way that's very, like, long-term, I think that's possible. We are nowhere close to that yet. Yeah. So in 10 years, that may be the level of change, but in the next, 3 years, 2 years, watch out for shiny object syndrome. Yeah.
So good. So what do you think is not going to change? What do you think is just bedrock that's not going anywhere, not going to move?
Number one is human nature. This is an argument that we had about the internet, all of that, like the way that things are sold, the type of messages that work. Very little has changed besides like superficial language details, between what worked 100 years ago and what works today. So human nature isn't going to change much. The fact that humans want human experiences, or just experiences in general, I don't think is going to change much. On some level, I think it was at Coachella a few years back, there was a Tupac hologram that performed on stage, and it made news, right? Because it was super, like, Tupac hologram performing on stage at Coachella, right? But still, at Coachella, the headliners were all humans, right?
Right.
And there's like all of these different human experience, and you could apply that to like going in, having retreats or mastermind groups or whatever, right? Human experience, the desire for human experience is not going to change. I think the way that we make decisions, we didn't even get into this, but my Ultimate Selling Story book talks about structuring your message around what's the problem that you have, what's the emotional agitation around it, what are the invalid other solutions that the person has tried, what does a solution need to do to be successful, and what action do they need to take to actually get that problem solved.
Good.
And that's essentially the buying process, right? I have a problem. It's agitating enough that I'm looking for a solution. Maybe I've tried other ways of solving it, but they've been invalid. What does a real solution need to do? And what action do I need to take to solve the problem, right? That process, I don't think that's going to change very much. There's things like that. Media can change, technology can change, all of that can change, but humans are still going to be humans
at the end of the day. Is there a book that you have encountered in your journey that has really made a difference in your life? Something that's just been such a big deal that you would recommend that any leaders who are listening who love to read, what would you recommend they put on their book list?
I want to say two. And they probably haven't come up. One of them, the first one probably has come up in other conversations. The book Drive by Daniel Pink.
Great book.
Specifically because we talk so much about the autonomy and what actually gets people to be motivated, to be internally driven, to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And so while getting paid well is a great thing, it's not necessarily what's going to motivate us in the biggest way. There are other factors backed up by science. And so from a leadership perspective, I think that that's a very, very solid recommendation. Just more on a personal development level, I recently went through, and this is the second book of hers that I went through, this book, Radical Compassion by Tara Brach. And she's a meditation teacher. And this book is the second one that talked about her RAIN process for essentially self-compassion. And I think one of the things that can really get in the way of us as leaders are all the baggage that we bring, right? And so if you get too easily frustrated with people on your team, if you talk negatively to yourself about something that goes on, if you struggle to share credit or to accept credit, if like all of that baggage that we can bring to leadership so many times reflects whether or not we want to admit it, reflects a low level of self-compassion. And if we can have compassion for ourselves, we can also have so much more compassion for other people, and they feel like they want to be their best for you too. And so I know a whole separate conversation that we talked about, maybe talking about, was becoming a leader by being the type of person who people want to follow, right? And I think self-compassion and kind of dealing with your own stuff has been a big part of that for me. And so this book, Radical Compassion, she does come from Buddhist teachings, but it's definitely not like trying to convert you to Buddhism or anything like that. It's there's a lot of secular lessons of mindfulness in there. It's all about that. It's about, number one, being able to have compassion for yourself, and then that compassion goes out to everybody else. And it's a very healthy way to approach life and leadership.
I think there's so much we can learn from so many people. One of the things I encourage is for people to maintain and choose a teachable spirit. I believe you can learn from anybody. Sometimes you might learn what not to do. That can be incredibly valuable, though, right? But you have to learn to eat the fish and leave the bones. There's always fish if you look for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love that. I love that compassion for yourself. I had a counselor tell me years ago, she said, if you talk to other people the way you talk to yourself, you would have no friends.
Yeah.
I thought, wow.
On the other hand, if you talk to yourself the way that you talk to your kid when they're struggling with something,
yes,
you would absolutely feel, you would feel wonderful.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful takeaway. I love that. I've got to check this book out. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. As we wrap up, if there's one thing you want people to take away from this episode, one thing you want them to walk away with, what would that one thing be?
It probably comes out of the 4P process. Like, try to figure out what the biggest problems, and problems being that catch-all term, right?
Yeah.
What the biggest problems are that you want to have solved in your business. And it could be a marketing problem. It could be tech problem. It could be a people problem, a team problem. It could be a personal, like, leadership capabilities problem, right? Sure. It could be lots of different things like that, right? But find out what the biggest problems you want to have solved are, and come up with a plan for just what you can do, not even to solve them, but what might solve them, right? Because so much of it is about testing and figuring out what works. And then, depending on the results there, figure out what you need to do next. What's your next problem to solve? What your next plan needs to be.
Roy, this has been so helpful. I just want to thank you for your generosity. I mean, you've just given and given and given today so many helpful insights from your experience, with so many other people, and from what you've learned. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I love having conversations like this that hopefully, even if somebody just has like one action item from this that they take away and they apply and it makes their life a little bit better, like, it's excellent that we've done it.
100%. I know the folks listening are going to want to stay connected with you and continue to learn from you. What is the best way for people to stay in touch with you?
I'm going to give two. One is you can go to royfurr.com. It's ROYFURR.com. If you are, especially if you're interested in my fractional CMO services, right? That's the site dedicated to my fractional CMO and Copy Chief services. Number two, if you just want to be a better marketer, if you want to learn marketing, I've actually published daily since 2014 on marketing skills. There are also often some leadership skills and things like that. And I have guests come on sometimes as well, but that's at breakthroughmarketingsecrets.com, breakthroughmarketingsecrets.com. And you can sign up to get email updates and all that. And actually, you're going to be a guest on the podcast, Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, very soon as well.
And I'm looking forward to that. I will say, I signed up at Breakthrough Marketing Secrets, and I was really blown away by the first couple of emails that I got. And like, hey, here's all the free stuff I want to give you. Here's all the stuff I want to share. I was like, wow, that's a lot. Like, this is a lot of information that will help me to get better in this. And I thought, again, how generous. It's just amazing. So I want to encourage everybody listening, go check this out. You're not going to regret it. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.